In this video, we're going to talk about 3 mental models that will help you think like a strategic leader. Now, if you put into practice any of these mental models, they will not only change the way you think, they will also help you get better answers, that will help you make better decisions, and they will help you solve problems faster, which will really help you to stand out as somebody with great leadership potential. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Kara. I've been teaching leadership and career advice to people all around the world for over 10 years now, through workshops, through coaching, through my podcast, and through this YouTube channel, which has probably been the most fun because I've been able to explore some really interesting topics like how to be more articulate, or framework thinking for leaders, or mental models like what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So if you're a beginner when it comes to mental models and you really want to learn what they are and get some ideas of how to get started with them, then this video is perfect for you. The first mental model I want to share with you is called first principles. Now, this is basically where you break something down, say a problem that you're facing, you break it down into its most basic and fundamental elements. You fully understand each element or each part of the problem that you are looking at. And once you have a good understanding of each individual part of that problem, then you can look at the bigger problem again with new eyes, and you can come up with new and innovative solutions because you have fully understood what has made up that problem, each part and each component of that problem. It's a bit like when you have a piece of machinery that isn't working, you might need to pull it apart, look at each individual component in that piece of machinery to find out which component is broken, which component is not working. And then once you've understood that, then you can put everything back together and have that machine work again. First principles is the thinking strategy that Elon Musk famously uses to get his business and his product ideas. For example, when he first had the idea to launch a rocket to Mars, into space, he visited a number of aerospace manufacturers, and he soon found out how expensive it was going to be to actually buy a ready-made rocket from one of those manufacturers. He realized that the price of a rocket is going to be a major problem, so he used first principles thinking to break down the rocket into its core elements. He asked himself, what is a rocket made up of? What are the individual parts that you need to build a rocket? And what is the value of each of those individual parts? He decided instead of buying a finished rocket from one of these manufacturers, he could make a rocket himself. He could start a company, he could buy the raw materials for less, and he could build the rockets himself. There are many other examples of leaders who have used first principles thinking, like the founders of Uber, who came up with a business idea when they couldn't find a taxi ride in Paris, or the founder of Toyota, who used the 5 whys technique to get to the root cause of a problem before finding a solution. So as you can see, the concept of deconstructing before reconstructing, which is basically what first principles is about, is a widely and commonly used mental model in business and in leadership. But why is that? Because it helps you bring innovative solutions. So sometimes it's really easy to develop one-trained thinking. This is where you repeat the same thinking process that you use all of the time, and you do it because it's easy and because you know exactly how to do it. But this lazy way of thinking, it won't bring you innovative ideas. It won't bring you new solutions that you've never thought of before. Whereas first principles thinking will. It also helps you remove assumptions that can hold your thinking back. So when we're facing a problem, we might have assumptions that are limiting our thinking ability. Like the Elon Musk example, when he found out how much it costs to purchase a finished rocket, he could have thought, this is way too expensive, I'm going to forget about this idea. But he didn't. He used the first principles mental model approach, and he broke down the problem. And in doing that, it led him to find a solution in a mentally limitless way. It's also a way that you can diversify your thinking. So a lot of leaders will employ different people in a team to achieve this. And of course, you can do that as well. But if you're on your own and you need to find a solution to a problem, then you can use first principles mental model to achieve this, because it forces your mind to think in a different way, and it forces you to see different solutions as well. So how can you get started with first principles thinking? Well, the first thing you need to do is to actually make time for thinking. How often do you do this? I know that I don't do this anywhere near as often as I should, but when you don't make time for thinking, you force your mind into the solutions that are the easiest and the quickest for you to find, which are probably the solutions that you've been using for many years. So you're not getting that diverse thinking that we talked about just a moment ago. So I encourage you to make time every day, make it a daily habit to invest in your thinking. Just 10, 20 minutes, just time for you to think. You also need to free your mind from previous assumptions or previous bias when it comes to your thinking. Basically, you need to start from scratch with your thinking, especially when you're looking at solving a problem. So don't let those previous assumptions that you have or previous experiences that you have force your thinking into one direction or another, because when you do this, you are not going to be able to find those new perspectives or those new ideas that you are seeking. You also need to break the problem down into individual elements. So look at each individual element and fully understand it. What makes up that problem? What are the issues that you're talking about that make up that problem? You need to understand this first. You need to deconstruct this. Remember, deconstruct before reconstruct. That's the only way you're going to be able to step back and to find new solutions and to get a different way of thinking about that problem. And the last step is to step back and look at that problem in a different way. So once you've understood each individual part or each individual component like we do with the previous step, then you need to step back, look at that problem in a different way, and then find different solutions to it. The second mental model is called inversion, and this is one that Charlie Munger famously used in his work. Now, inversion is where instead of looking at what you want to achieve in the future, you look at what you don't want to achieve. You flip it around and look at what you want to avoid, what you don't want to happen. What is your greatest fear? Because when you do this, you can work out how to avoid that negative outcome, how to avoid that thing that you do not want to happen, and hopefully you can achieve success instead. This isn't a type of thinking that I was taught, and I'd say it'd probably be the same for you too, but apparently this inversion, this mental model for thinking, has actually been around for a very long time. The Stoics use this method to handle failure. They would look at all the negative things that could happen in their life, like losing a job, like becoming ill, like losing their house. They would identify all these negative things that could happen, the fears that they had, the things that they did not want to happen. They would identify them so that they could overcome that fear of those things happening, and so that they could find solutions and work out plans to make sure that those greatest fears they had never occurred. You can use this exact same approach when it comes to your leadership. Instead of asking yourself what makes a successful leader and coming up with a list of those things, instead, why don't you flip it around and look at what can make you a terrible leader? What are the things that you want to avoid? Create a list of those, and then you can work to avoid being or doing any of those things. I think this type of opposite thinking, or this out-of-the-box thinking, is really important in leadership because it stops you from thinking like everyone else. It stops you from repeating the same things over and over again, and it forces you to see things that other people don't see. It forces you to see things that might not be obvious from the outset. And in terms of leadership, this is definitely what being a forward thinker is about, which, as I've mentioned in a number of my other YouTube videos, is a distinguishing factor between being a mediocre leader and being a great leader. So how can you get started using inversion? Well, I want to do an activity with you that is related to your future leadership goals, and we're going to use inversion so you can really get a feel for what it's like to use it as a mental model. First question I have for you is, what do you want to achieve in your career? This is the best case scenario, your wildest dream, your best dream, the best thing that you want to achieve in your career. So think of job title, think maybe of company that you want to work for, think of the amount of salary you want to earn and the amount of responsibility that you want to have in your job. What is the best case scenario that you could hope for? Question 2, what do you not want to happen? So this is your worst case scenario. What is your greatest fear in your career? This could be staying in the same job for 5 years doing really boring tasks. It could be earning a salary of $50,000 a year or less for the next 5 years. It could be seeing your coworkers get promoted ahead of you again and again. Try to think of what is the worst case scenario for you in your career? What do you not want to happen? Now, question 3, how can you avoid the worst case scenario? So this is where you develop strategies to avoid your greatest fear, just like the Stoics did when they used this method as well. So for you, in terms of the worst case scenario you outlined in number 2, this might be you need to invest in your learning and development. You need to learn more. You need to upskill yourself so that you won't be stuck in the same job for the next 5 years doing boring tasks. Or you might need to build your visibility. You might need to be a lot more proactive in building your visibility so that your boss notices you, they notice your accomplishments and the value you bring to the company, and they're more likely to promote you. It might actually be asking for a pay rise. Perhaps you want to earn more money, but you've never asked for a pay rise, and maybe that is the way out of your worst case scenario. Personally, I think that inversion is a way to really get our butts moving, because the greatest fear is something that we want to avoid, and quite often knowing our greatest fear, that is just too scary. It is too painful to live with. And it really forces you to find solutions, to find strategies and ways out of avoiding that, just so you can make sure that that greatest fear doesn't happen. Third mental model is one that I created myself for my business. And that's the thing with mental models, is that you can use the tried and tested mental models that have been around for years, that people have used before you. But you can also create your own. You can also, from your own experiences, from your own problems that you face, you can also start to create your own mental models that you use for your own business or for your own life. So this mental model that I created is called short-term, long-term, pretty self-explanatory. And it's something that I come up with when I wanted to make sure that my business was running well, both in the short term, but also in the long term. Because it can be really easy to get stuck in short-term thinking, especially when you run your own business and especially when you do it on your own, because there are so many daily tasks that need to be performed, and you can really get stuck in those daily tasks and forget about long-term planning, forget about long-term thinking to make sure that your business runs well and smoothly right now in the short term, but also in the long term too. You can take this same approach with your career. You could get stuck with short-term thinking with your career and focus only on the tasks and things that need to be done this week at work, this month, or even this quarter at work in order to be great at your job and to please your boss. But what about in 2 years' time? Are you doing the things that you need to do to achieve the goals that you want to achieve in 2 years' time? Are you doing the things today that you need to do in order to be where you want to be in 2 years' time? If you don't focus on both the short term and the long term, then you will either fail at the short term or you might fail at the long term. So you really need to find a balance between focusing on both the short and the long term. And you need to make moves as well to achieve the goals that you have, both in the short term and in the long term too. I think that working on your long-term goals or developing that long-term thinking is probably the hardest, because you put in effort and time and resources towards those long-term goals, but you don't see any immediate results, which is completely normal because those long-term goals are in the future. But you might feel that you are wasting your time. You might feel that you're not using your time or your resources wisely. So because you're not getting that immediate gratification, you might immediately revert back to focusing on those short-term goals, because that is where you're going to see the results happen. But that's why people don't achieve the success they desire, because they give up too early. They don't put in the work or the effort that is needed in order to achieve those long-term results. They don't have the faith that the work and effort they put in will actually lead them to where they want to be. Then they see other people who reach those goals, those long-term goals that they may have had for themselves, and they think that those people reach them simply because of luck. They don't realize that those people actually reach those goals because they put in the work that was necessary. They put in that effort, they took the steps they needed to take in order to achieve those long-term goals. And they also had the faith that the work that they were putting in, despite the lack of immediate results or immediate gratification, they had faith that the work they were putting in and every step they were taking every single day was going to lead them to the results that they wanted. And they kept this faith, They held on to it and eventually they succeeded. So I encourage you to look at the tasks that you perform every day in your career. Are they for short-term goals or are they for long-term goals? And if you find that you are not putting in much effort or time into working towards your long-term goals, then that's something you need to change. So you need to work out what those long-term goals are if you don't have them identified already. Then once you have them identified, you need to work out what steps you need to take in order to achieve those long-term goals. Now, one really important thing you need to understand with mental models is they are individual pieces that fit into a bigger framework of thinking, into your bigger mental framework. So this is where you need to understand what framework thinking is, because this is the overarching idea that will hold all of your mental models together. Now, I do have a video on framework thinking, which is a really popular video on my channel, and you can watch that up here right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in this video.